Good morning. For the first day in a long time. Don't feel like watching from the sidelines.
Welcome to the Core Conversations podcast by Ampelis, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. My name is Robbie Harmon, and I'll be your host. Welcome to another episode of Core Conversations, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. My name is Robbie Harmon, and I'll be your host. And today we have a great conversation lined up with a guest who is a dear friend and somebody that I love and respect, Braden Brown. Our topic is going to be, I think, one that's relevant for a lot of people who are listening to this, mothers, fathers, things that they might want to send to their kids. But it's going to be all about how do we as parents, and then how do we as kids have the confidence to pursue big goals? How do we perform our best and under pressure? How do we deal with failure? We're going to talk about some things related to mental health and mental performance maybe, and how are those things different and how are they the same? But ultimately some principles, whether you're an athlete or your child is an athlete or they're in the performing arts on stage, or they're just trying to be a good student. How do you show up your best in the biggest moments, and how do you deal with adversity and failure and things that all of us want to know how to counsel our kids about? So Braden is here. Braden has a unique background, and we'll ask him to introduce it a little bit. But Braden, I had the privilege of working with Braden and observing him in a number of different settings, in group settings where he's working with teams and leading discussions, also with individuals, and just got to see how sincere and authentically he's able to connect with people as he's helping them through difficult situations where they might feel stuck, or helping them really get the best out of themselves. So before we get into his background, I'll just say thanks for being here, Braden, and so grateful that you can be. Let's start this conversation just with your story, because I think you've got an interesting background that has led you to be in the position that you're in today, where you're doing what you're doing. Starting, with the fact that you're a multi-sport athlete in high school, you love sports, journey all the way through BYU, professional career. Now you're in the space that you are at Brigham Young University, helping student athletes with mental health and mental performance stuff. So maybe just talk to us about your background and your story, how you went from being an athlete who was just a stud on the field and figuring out that you wanted to do this professionally, and maybe some of your training and background.
Yeah. So interesting is a great word choice, and stud is an interesting word choice as well. I guess it just depends on who you talk to. But before I get into that, seriously, thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to chat with you again. And yep. I've admired you for a long time. I still tell people in my family that I want to be like Robbie Harmon when I grow up. So
you need better role models.
I know, whatever. But yeah, it's crazy, because I'll talk to the athletes at BYU, and I'll even say this to them. If you would have told me that I would be doing now what I'm doing 10 years ago, I would have probably laughed in your face and said, "Man, you might need to go get checked out, because you're not messing with reality right now." But yeah, so I'll try to keep it somewhat condensed. But yeah, 3-sport athlete in high school. I played football, basketball, and baseball. Love sports. I kind of credit that to my dad. He was a pitcher a pitcher for the baseball team at BYU before he went on his mission. And so he kind of got me and my older brother in sports from a young age. And I fell in love with the competitive environment. I didn't always love it though. I don't really share this a whole lot with people. My first year playing tackle football, I actually genuinely hated football. Like, I didn't want to do it.
Like, it made you anxious, or you just did not like the sport?
I didn't like, it was just, I was so hot and sweaty and just all the pads. And I was 7 years old, and I was thinking, like, why do people do this? And you just like get, banged around. And I had to play up a couple of years because I was a bigger kid. And so it was not the greatest start to the football career, but I guess that's a lesson in and of itself, that just because something might start off not so great, it doesn't necessarily have to determine how it ends. And so, yeah, I was fortunate to get a full ride scholarship to play football at BYU. I was recruited there as a tight end, and then about halfway through my redshirt freshman year, offensive coordinator asked if I wanted to do some cross training at tackle. And in my mind, I was kind of raised to be team first, and whatever the team needs, you go ahead and do it. And so I said, if it's going to help me get on the field, then why not?
Had you put on some weight, I'd assume?
Yeah. So that year I actually started 2 games at 255 pounds. And I had my welcome to the big leagues moment against University of Utah, 2009. You can still look up this clip. Maybe we can find it and do it as a little
Put
overlay.
it in the note. Yeah.
I used to avoid it and be embarrassed by it, but now I just kind of own it. But I got absolutely demolished by a guy named Koamisi, who ended up getting drafted in the second round that year. So he was a good player and almost gave up a forced fumble that would have ended the game. But luckily, we ended up getting the W that game, so I could.
Didn't feel quite as bad about it.
Yeah, but that was one of those moments where if I could have just disappeared into Lavelle Edwards Stadium turf and just never shown my face in public again, that would have been one of those moments. I tell that story because A, it's kind of my own way of processing through it, and B, it ties into a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about
today.
So yeah, after my redshirt freshman year, put on 55 pounds, which for some people might sound.
So you went from 255 to 310?
About 305, 310 was my
heavens.
playing weight at BYU.
Wow.
Which some people that might sound like a fun time, but for me, I tried doing it the clean way. And when you do it the clean way, you have to eat a lot of food very frequently. And so my relationship with food and just the whole process was kind of a nightmare. But when you connect what you're doing with something that's meaningful to you, you find a way. So
when I picture carrying around like a 45-pound plate, as you're lifting, picture just putting that on your back and carrying that everywhere you go.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite the ordeal, but yeah, then I was able to play tackle for sophomore, junior, senior year. After my senior year, I got invited to the NFL Combine, which was a really cool experience because, my whole life I grow up watching these guys compete and do all the drills and just kind of hoping one day that might be me. And then to kind of be there in the moment, realizing that dream was a really special moment for me. Ended up didn't get drafted, got picked up by the St. Louis Rams as an undrafted free agent, went through all the OTAs, mini camps right before my rookie season. I say re-injured. The fact is I never got my back healthy enough to just play at that level. And so I had like 7 failed epidural shots and I was having radiating pain down into my feet and couldn't put my socks on before practice. And the medical team was like, dude, there's nothing else we can do. You got to get surgery. So I got surgery. And then after a conversation with the surgeon and my wife, I decided that
you were married to Rachel. You got married to Rachel at BYU.
Yeah, 2009. So
before you went out.
Yeah. So we've been married for a few years. We were trying to start a family, and I was just kind of, to be completely transparent, I was in a place emotionally, mentally, physically, where I was just kind of a train wreck. And so that was kind of my way of just trying to reevaluate my life and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish. And I made the decision to step away from football, which was interesting because at the time it felt like the right thing to do. But then I had a hard time, watching football for a couple of years after that because it was a huge part of
what could have been and what,
for sure.
This life part of your life that was over.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that I got to experience all of these things because now in my work with the athletes at BYU, it really helps me connect on a different level than other people might be able to. Going through kind of this identity foreclosure phase where it's like this thing that's such a huge part of your life for 15 years is now just gone. And you don't really ever think that it's going to happen to you until it happens to you. And then you got to try to figure out how to navigate it. So yeah, I remember I was on the drive back from St. Louis and I called Coach Mendenhall, who was my head coach at BYU. And I was gung-ho to jump into the coaching profession. I thought that's what I was going to do when I was done playing. And I'm so glad I had that conversation because Coach Mendenhall, he wasn't the most personable person. He kind of kept to himself a little bit. And so like having
a little more stoic.
Yeah. More stoic. That's a good way to put it. Trying to have like this in-depth conversation with Coach Mendenhall didn't really happen very often. But he's very wise. And he encouraged me to talk to a couple of the graduate assistants at the time before I finally made that or decided to dive in head first with that decision. And after those conversations, I'm like, actually, I don't think I want to be a coach, So then that was a moment in my life where I'm like, I literally have no idea what I'm going to do. Like no clue at all. Maybe I'll go be a trainer at Gold's Gym because, I got my undergrad from BYU in exercise and wellness. And then we're trying to start a family at the time. And then it was my wife and she's my better 7/8 for a reason because she's the actual smart one in the relationship. She's the one who first introduced the thought of going to therapy as a job. And so I'm sitting here 6'6", 317 pounds was the heaviest I got. And my first thought was, people are going to think I'm a weirdo and like a creep, going from being like this big macho man kind of guy persona to now I'm going to be sitting in a room talking about feelings and emotions. And then I thought about it and I'm like, actually, I went to a therapist when I was in high school. I found it to be extremely beneficial for me. And then I went and saw a sports psychologist one time during my BYU playing days. It was my senior year, but it was super helpful. And then I thought that, that's actually a way to still be a coach, but just kind of in a different arena, in an arena that's super important for life and athletes and everything else. So I ended up getting my master's up at Utah State in marriage and family therapy. Said I would never get a PhD, never say never. Went out to East Carolina University, got my PhD in medical family therapy. And then that took us to Indiana for an internship. And then that's when I first started working with athletes pretty exclusively. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, now everything, all the roads, all of the challenges, the trials, the questioning kind of made sense. And I thought, this is what I have to do. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what brings me a great sense of fulfillment. It's just what I love doing. So
at that point, had you already done your dissertation? Because your dissertation was on the role of spirituality in student athletes,
Yeah. So
Division I student athletes.
Yeah. That year was the year where I was finishing my dissertation. Okay. That was quite the experience. Something I never thought I'd be able to do, but figured out a way. That was when those kind of intangibles you learn as a student athlete your whole life really paid off. So yeah, it was cool to be able to apply what I was reading about and learning about in the research with the athletes that I was working with in real time. And then even longer story short, sent a DM to Kurt Henderson. I had no idea he was helping with athletes on the mental side. And so kind of jokingly, but also seriously, we just found out we were pregnant with our third child. And so we were having the discussions about maybe it's time to move back to Utah. And so I sent Kurt, I still have it in my DMs. I said, hey, if you ever are thinking about hiring someone, just holler at your boy. And then that led to a conversation, and then had the privilege of working with Ampelis for a couple of years. And that kind of turned into a full-time job with BYU athletics. So kind of a whirlwind of a ride, but it's been awesome. And I'm super grateful.
And it's positioned you perfectly to do what you're doing. You know what I mean? To, like, as you said, to connect with and help these student athletes navigate the unique pressures that they're facing and they can relate because they know that you've been there, which is awesome. So your current title, you're a associate athletic director over mental health, and you work with a couple of different athletic teams and any, miscellaneous other student athletes, but football, swim and dive, gymnastics, and then miscellaneous other athletes. There's a lot of these. I mean, those are big teams and organizations. Yeah. There's a lot of student athletes that look to you for help when they need it, which is awesome.
Yeah. I feel like I have the best job in the world, and I'm super grateful and fortunate to be in this position.
Well, we know that if the football team does well, we can attribute the success to you. If they don't do well,
it's because not enough of them were meeting with me.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It'll be a good lesson learned for next season.
Okay. So I want to dive into this conversation because I think there's a lot of people that will listen to this that have kids that they, of course, care more than anything about, and they want to help them be their best. They want to know, how do I parent, in these different circumstances? And maybe even there's some things that we'll have you share directly to the younger people who might listen to this, or whose parents might want to share some nuggets and tips. But I want to start just with some stuff that's personal, if that's okay.
Sure.
If we go there. So you and Rachel have 3 kids.
Yep.
Hadley, Hudson, Chloe. Ages are now Hudson and Hadley are what grade?
They're 5th grade. They're turning 11 in like 4 weeks.
Okay. So 11, and then Chloe's 4.
She just turned 3 in July.
3. Okay. But Hudson, has some unique challenges, which has been probably both a challenge, but also a blessing for your family. Maybe talk to us about that situation and how you're training and some of the things that you've learned in your studies and as you work with people to really show up their best in different circumstances. Just tell us about your personal situation there, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Hudson's autistic. And it was before his 4th birthday when he finally got evaluated and received the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. That was an interesting time of life. We just moved to Indiana. And it was one of those things where I had suspected from the time he was probably about 18 months. And with twins, it's challenging because you try not to compare them, but it's also really hard not to compare them. Mm-hmm. And especially with a twin sister, girls just kind of naturally develop a little bit more quickly than boys. And so there is kind of the denial aspect as a parent where it's like, you suspect something might be a little bit different or a little bit unique about a child, but you don't really want to accept the reality of that situation. And then when Rachel and I heard from the doctor that did the evaluation that we think that autism spectrum disorder is an accurate diagnosis, that was one of those, I think it was a grieving moment as a parent. And not because we kind of thought it was like, you know, our lives are over, Hudson's life is over, but I think it was
woe
just,
is me kind of thing.
Yeah, it was kind of just like, you know, we're going to be faced with some unique challenges and we didn't really know what to do or what was next and how to really navigate that. And you kind of envision as a parent, like what you think your kids' lives might look like. And then when you get news like that, it's kind of like, it just kind of turns that vision upside down. And then you kind of have to pick up the pieces and figure out, okay, so what is life as it is now going to look like? And how is it going to, you know, look moving forward? And it's, you know, it's hard for me to talk about Hudson without getting emotional because he's just, man, you've met Hudson, and to know Hudson is just, he's so full of love and so full of life. And I feel like he's been a greater teacher for me than anybody else in my life. I mean, I just, you can't know the kid without just smiling and loving him because he doesn't, there's no judgment, there's no guile, there's no comparison. It's just, he just loves people. And so for anything, for me, that's been such a huge blessing, is just that there's so much power in just accepting people as they are and just loving them exactly how they are, because we're all unique. We're all different. We all have our own special circumstances and challenges. And it's just being compassionate and understanding and just trying to love people for who they are.
Yeah. I wanted to start there just because I think there's a lot of people that will relate, you know, and you've done such I think a masterful job as I mean, I'm an outsider observing in, you know, and I don't see all the challenges and stuff, but I just really respect how you've shown up and created traditions and things that you do, whether it's taking them up to Salt Lake on Sunday mornings to hear music in the spoken word or whatever. But it's always a bonus when Hudson's tagging along. You know, you hope that when you're speaking, Hudson's there and he somehow gets his hands on the mic because it makes it more fun.
Yeah.
But you've done a masterful job. So I just applaud you for that. But any other tips or advice if people are dealing with that kind of dynamic? I mean, things that have helped you and Rachel, you did share some good advice already there, but other things that you would share with people?
Yeah, I think that, so for me, I'm a big proponent in this concept of acceptance, and acceptance doesn't mean that I have to necessarily like my circumstances or my situations, or I have to be, you know, happy about it, but it's just accepting it for it is what it is sort of thing. And then trying to figure out, okay, so given the circumstances as they are, without trying to change them for what we wish they would be or what we hope they would be, how can we rally together to try to navigate things moving forward?
Well, we ought to do another podcast and bring Hudson with you. That'd be fun to,
he's
fun to do a mini episode.
I tell him he needs to start like his own YouTube channel or something because he loves it. He'll record himself on my phone all the time and just does funny, just Hudson things. So, and
the other part that I've really admired about you and Rachel is watching not just how you've just really loved and embraced Hudson, but also Hadley. You know, with sometimes you get a situation where you've got somebody who needs a little bit more attention and you don't pay as much attention to the other kids, but you guys have done just a really good job from, again, an outsider's perspective of making your kids feel loved and thriving in a situation that can sometimes throw you off the rails. So
yeah,
kudos to you guys.
Well, and I think just to really quickly on that point too, I feel like I won the lottery with not only my wife, but also Hudson's twin sister, Hadley. She's been I knew I was going to do this multiple times and I'm okay with it because I tell my athletes all the time, let it out. It's better out than in, you know, but man, she is such a special person. And I feel like Hudson is where he is today and who he is today because from the very beginning, she has just been his constant companion. And we've even had conversations with Hadley like that because we don't want her to feel like her whole life has to revolve around making sure Hudson's okay and taking care of Hudson, because we want her to feel like she can have her own life and own friends and, do the things that she wants to do. And every single time without fail, she says, it's okay. I love Hudson and I want to make sure he's okay.
Jeez, what an angel.
So I just, man, I feel like I won the lottery with my wife and with Hadley and also with Hudson too. Chloe, she's another story, but she's still
too much to be determined.
Yeah, TBD.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so let's start with a couple. Every episode we try to do some myth busting questions, like fact or fiction, that might set the stage for some of our discussions. So first one here is, feeling nervous or anxious before a big event, something that you should best try to overcome. That's not a healthy thing. True or false?
I would say mostly false. I think, do you want me to elaborate?
Yeah, please elaborate a little bit. We'll probably get into stuff like this later too, but give us a little context.
Yeah. So it would be great if we didn't feel that sense of nervousness. And there's actually some interesting research behind physiologically what's happening, and then how we kind of frame what we're experiencing is going to how it's going to affect us. So if I can learn to frame this physiological experience of, increased heart rate, increased sweating, that butterfly feeling as excitement, that has a very different effect on my performance than, oh, I'm so nervous right now.
That makes sense.
And so I think that trying to overcome it is not necessarily possible or the most effective goal, but learning how to better manage that energy
and embracing it and channeling it.
Exactly. Towards something that can be facilitative to what we're trying to accomplish.
Makes sense. Second question is maybe somewhat related, but feeling sad or stressed is inherently a bad thing that we should seek to root out of our lives.
Well, if that's a bad thing, then I know a lot of bad people in life, because I think it's just a natural part of being a human. That's one of the things I try to emphasize. And it's so interesting. So many male athletes will sit with me and they finally have a space to just kind of talk about what's going on internally, and tears will come out. And usually the first response is, oh, sorry, my bad. And my response is, you're allowed to be human in here. It's just part of being a human being. Doesn't mean you're soft. Doesn't mean you're weak. And that's the thing that I kind of get sad about, is at some point along the line, we're kind of sent those messages that just having a human experience makes us weak or soft. And I get it. Like, there's certain moments where you want to be able to express that, and other moments where it might be, more effective to not. But I think that, we all have moments of sadness. We all have moments of stress. And it's learning how to navigate those moments without staying stuck in them that I think can make a really big difference.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that perspective and answer. I remember one time we were doing a thing for a group of ladies at church. You were nice to come drive up to Alpine and do it with me, but I think you teed up, I can't remember, the idea of like sadness and stress, not inherently a bad thing, but it's like maybe prolonged periods of like feeling stuck in those states is what we want to overcome. But
Sure,
those states in and of themselves are a healthy part of experiencing the richness of life, and we shouldn't inherently label them bad. And all of us, just because we might feel sad for a period of time or stressed for a period of time, doesn't necessarily mean we have a problem. That, I think we've maybe a little bit in how much we've tried to destigmatize some of these conversations around mental health. Maybe sometimes we've gone too far to where, everybody starts to feel like we talk about it so much that if I feel sad, I am depressed.
Yeah.
Or if I feel stressed, I must have an anxiety problem, rather than saying, oh, that's normal. Like, I just feel sad right now because something hard happened, or I'm really stressed because this thing is a big deal and I'm not sure how I'm going to show up or whatever.
Sure. And there are a lot of people. I actually had a really interesting conversation. He has a son on the football team. He's a family medicine physician, and in the medical world, they kind of base a lot of their decisions off of numbers.
Yeah.
So you get a PHQ-9 or a GAD-7, and if you score in a certain range, then that kind of indicates maybe medication management or some sort of psychopharmacological agent to help manage those symptoms. But his approach is we're treating the person. We're not treating this piece of paper. And so his point is that there are some people that might score really high on the PHQ-9, but they are still able to function just fine in life. And it doesn't really affect their ability to work or be in relationships or, be successful in school. And there are other people where it's really impactful. So you really have to take in the whole context of the individual, how it's affecting them, how they're managing it. And some people are really good at learning how to effectively manage and navigate just what's a really natural and normal part of being a human being.
And I love the idea of it being not labeling yourself with titles associated with this that might cause you to feel stuck or to identify with, I am a person who is depressed or anxious. And sometimes you are dealing with depression or anxiety symptoms, but more thinking of it more like a dial instead of a switch that causes you to label yourself and learn how to deal with those. I've learned this from you, frankly. Learned that those emotions are things that we should kind of accept, as you just talked about in your introduction here, and learn how to rechannel or to thrive in spite of those emotions is better than identifying labels, and labeling yourself in some ways.
For sure. In the therapy world, it's called externalization. And if we can create distance between what we're experiencing versus letting it all consume us, that makes a huge difference. Even using language like this is sadness, or this is the depression, or the anxiety is really working in overdrive right now, instead of like, I am so anxious right now, or I'm so depressed. Even just the power of our language, how we label things, how we talk to ourselves, can make a huge difference.
So maybe one takeaway on this myth bust question is, if you or a child is feeling sad or showing sadness or stress, maybe not necessarily labeling those things as, depression or anxiety, but recognizing these are normal human emotions that we should learn how to feel and wrestle with, and seeking appropriate help to know how to manage them, of course, but avoiding some of those labels that I think we're quick to throw on ourselves and other people right now. Okay. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different themes. Some of these things, I know they're topics that you have a unique passion for or interest in. And I think as parents, all of us are going to be really interested in what you have to say on the topic. So 4 themes that are going to be cultivating confidence and resilience, performing under pressure, navigating failure and insecurities, and finding a why, and living mindfully. So we'll start with the first, which is cultivating confidence and resilience. But I'd love to just hear your reflections on what parents can do to start to nurture confidence and resilience in their kids. We all want that for our kids, but maybe just some reflections or tips as we try to cultivate that inside of our own homes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts with giving your kids opportunities to stretch themselves, and to engage in experiences that are a little bit outside of their comfort zone. I think that's the first part, right? Because we have to kind of do something that's outside of the sense of what feels normal and out of ordinary, in order to kind of build that belief that we are able to do something. And I think the other part of it is highlighting the process when they do things well, to help them actually take a step back and think about it, instead of just saying, good job, way to go. It's like, well, what was it? What about it was a good job? And what deserved a way to go? Like another way to frame that is, man, that was really difficult for you. It was really frustrating at first, and then you stuck with it. You thought through a different approach, and then you figured it out. So you're highlighting the process of how they worked through a frustrating moment. They stuck with it. They tried a different strategy, and then that's how they were able to figure it out. And a lot of times we jump straight to the highlighting the outcome instead of the process of how they got the outcome to begin with.
Which is helping them conceptualize maybe that pattern or that skill of being resilient, dealing with adversity, finding a solution, and then overcoming it.
Right. And then depending on the age, it's even better when they're able to self-identify and recognize what it is that they did. So if you just ask them, like, how are you able to do that? Like, what led you to be able to do that? And then they have to take a step back, and it's like, well, like, what was it that I did that helped me do that? And sometimes they have to really think about it and they don't really know. But other times it's like, well, it's because I kept trying, and I didn't quit, and being able to have that organic, authentic self-talk and affirmations is so much more important than anything that I can say or someone else can say.
Yeah, the story you tell yourself.
For sure.
So two things you mentioned. One is kind of the idea of just exposure, like giving them opportunities to stretch beyond themselves, not sheltering them so much from things, taking risks maybe, but then also this idea of helping them take a step back and reflect on patterns where they have faced adversity, found a solution, and overcome it. So they start to develop a concept of how they can do that and learn that skill and gain confidence in that skill.
Yeah. And there's a lot of research behind that concept. It's the growth mindset research from Carol Dweck. And she actually found that with kids where you just praise the outcome versus the effort that they put in for that outcome, the kids who are just praised on, what they ultimately did don't want to challenge themselves more and don't want to stretch themselves more compared to the kids where you said, man, you worked really hard. And I'm really proud of how much effort you put into that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So I guess this is a companion question to the one we just talked about, but I'd love to talk about any common patterns you see maybe in young people who might limit that young person's resilience or confidence. So maybe the opposite of what are the positive things parents can do, but what are patterns that you see in the lives of kids that might be dealing with challenges in this area?
That's a great question. I was actually talking to my wife about this question earlier today, just to kind of get her feedback. Because again, she's the one who's the real brains of the operation, but we kind of had the same conclusion, which is, and as a parent, it's really difficult because it's this paradox where like, you don't want to see your kids struggle and suffering.
Yeah.
But then you realize, like, when you think about it as an adult, what are some of the things that really shaped you to become who you are? Usually there's some sort of like struggle or suffering and overcoming those things that gave you that sense of resilience and confidence that now I can handle hard things moving forward. And it's almost counterintuitive because it doesn't, you wish it didn't have to be that way, but it is that way. And so I think what a lot of parents do is they jump in too soon to try to rescue before letting kids try to figure it out. And when we do that, and I have to be the first one to admit this, I also do this. I'm a trained marriage and family therapist. I've got all the credentials and I still do things that I know better than that I shouldn't be doing because I'm a human being, right? But in an ideal world, it's letting kids make mistakes, work through those mistakes, and find a way to make it past those mistakes within reason, right? Like we don't want to put our kids in situations where it's going to be epic failure after epic failure, because then that can also have a detrimental on their confidence and resilience. But we have to create opportunities for kids to struggle and to learn how to work through and navigate things.
Kind of sit with discomfort and adversity for a minute before we immediately try to pull them out of it.
For sure. I witnessed this. So we were in Newport Beach and I'm going to out myself right now. I was in the Seaside Donuts. That was like a daily stop for me.
I know.
But I'm sitting in there and there's probably like 8-year-old and 6-year-old kid, and they're ordering themselves, and their mom was just kind of standing off in the corner. And it was actually pretty painful to watch because there was a language barrier and the person taking the order didn't really understand what the kids were trying to say. And they were kind of looking at each other. And I was sitting there fully expecting the mom at some point to come in and say, wait, what do you want? Oh yeah, they want this and this. She stood there the whole time and just let them work through it themselves. And I was like, I wanted to go up and just like shake her hand and say, kudos to you for just letting that happen, because I would have probably stepped in and just taken over. Because there's like that sense of discomfort that we feel as a parent, where it's like we see the struggle, we see the challenge, and then it's human nature to, oh, I have a solution for this, I can just step in and fix it. But what we don't understand is that we're kind of indirectly communicating to our kids that I don't believe that you have the ability to figure this out. I don't believe that you have the skills to work through this challenge or whatever it is.
That's a great example. As you're sharing that, Jessica, my wife, is really good at this too.
Yeah.
And we have a daughter she's 12, Quinn, and she's been a dancer and she's got a great singing voice, but hasn't done as many team sports and other things. And we thought this year that cross country would be a really good thing for her. And so we have our kids buy their own clothes. Like we help them. We call it family economy, and they have ways that they earn money and point system and stuff. So they have enough money that they can then use to buy their own clothes and shoes and just get used to having a budget. And so they had to buy their school clothes this year, and it was expensive. And she's like, and they wear uniforms at the school they go to. And so she had to spend like $192 on school uniform stuff. And she was just having a hard time with it. And we're like, okay, so how about this? If you do cross country, we'll pay for half of your school clothes.
Yeah.
And she did not want to do it because it was hard, and last time we did a little 5K, she was uncomfortable and it hurt. And so the first couple of days she was nervous. She had a hard time falling asleep. And I had that same instinct though, to like, oh, maybe you don't have to do it if you don't really want to do it or whatever. But I had little Bird, my wife, she's not saying literally, but I could picture her like trying to say, no, this is going to be good for her.
Yeah.
And so she's into it like 2 weeks now, but she's already she feels stronger. You can see her doing things, whether it's, V-ups, doing core work or going out and running, where she's just getting stronger. But I had to fight that instinct to say, oh, that's going to be hard. You don't have to do that if you don't want to.
Yeah. Can I piggyback off that story really quick? 'Cause I wanted to share this. I think I've shared this maybe with you in the past, but so when we first moved back to Utah, and I almost got in so many car accidents because you don't see the mountains in Utah County like you don't see Indiana. There's no mountains like that in Indiana or North Carolina. And so we were outside of Utah for almost 7 years, and we moved back, and I'm like, this is incredible. Like, this is where we live. This is crazy to me. It's something I took for granted my whole life. And so I'd always point out the Y on the mountain, because it's kind of a cool thing. And Hudson, he kept saying like, and I think I had told them, Daddy's hiked to the top of that Y before. And both my kids are like, wait, you can hike to the top of that thing? And I'm like, oh yeah. Like, we used to do it wasn't for fun, but it was, one of the Coach Mendenhall welcome to fall camp kind of initiations. And, so Hudson kept saying, Daddy, I want to hike to the top. I want to hike to the top of Y Mountain. I want to hike to the top of the Y. And I'm just sitting there thinking, no chance. Because Hudson, like he gets really uncomfortable and he doesn't like sweating, and it's just like has all these sensory issues. And so I'm like, no, we won't do it. We won't do it. And then he just was so persistent. So finally I was like, full transparency to try to prove a point, to say like, yeah, this is why we didn't do it. I'm like, okay, we'll give it a try. I literally texted Rachel the day of, and I said, $100 by the time we make it to the first switchback, both of our kids are ready to quit and go home. And so sure enough, we get like halfway through the first switchback, and both Hudson and Hadley are like, well, Hudson, he was so cute. He's like, Daddy, I think I just want to go back in the car now. And so I was faced with one of those. It was an opportunity for me as a parent to say, okay, yeah, see, I knew it. Like, big shock. Like I kind of predicted this would happen. But I said, this is going to be hard, and it's okay, because we'll take as much time as we need. We have enough water, we have enough snacks, and like there's no race. We'll keep going. And then Hudson finally found out. He's a numbers guy, so we'd get to switchback 1 and 2, and he goes, Dad, how many switchbacks are there? And I said, I think there's 13. And then once he found that out, he was just a man on a mission. Because you knew once I got to 7, I was one closer to being to 13. And then joke was on me as his dad. Not only did he finish, but he finished before anybody else.
No way.
And this was a kid who he had a hard time just like walking around the neighborhood without getting hot and uncomfortable. So a lot of lessons learned, but the one that I wanted to highlight is on the way back down, I'm talking to Hadley. She's a little bit more animated and sometimes dramatic, so she gets my genes. I said, so Hadley, what'd you think about that hike? And she goes, it was awesome. Well, it was horrible. And I was like, okay, so
out of the mouth of a little like 8 or 9-year-old.
Yeah. I'm like, well, what was the horrible part about it? She's like, all the hiking. It was so hot and it was so hard and my legs were so sore. And I was like, yeah, that was a tough hike. My legs are sore too. And I said, what was the awesome part? And she goes, the view at the top. And I said, this is one of those dad moments, but I'm like, I'm so grateful we got to experience that, because then it's like, isn't it interesting that you had to go through all the horrible parts, the sore legs, being out of breath, being thirsty, being tired, to experience the reward of being at the top. And I think for her, that's just another way as parents where we can kind of highlight those small moments where you did something that was really difficult and really challenging. You stuck with it, you found a way, and then you were able to receive the reward, whatever that might be.
That's a perfect story. I love that story. I think it illustrates the principle that you've been talking about so well. So staying on this topic of confidence and resilience, I think a lot of us, we want our kids to be dreamers and have big goals that they chase and pursue, and really be all in, be committed and work hard and do all the things that you want to do to achieve that goal. And I'd love to hear your reflections on, as people do have big goals and they are pursuing big things and you want them to be all in on that. But what counsel would you give to parents or to kids who have those kind of goals and you're trying to get them to be all in, but you also don't want them to base their self-worth on the achievement or the outcome associated with, achieving the goal versus maybe that process, or they're finding joy somehow in the pursuit rather than that outcome. What reflections do you have on that? Because I know that's an important thing. And sometimes people can get so tied up in the achievement that they don't allow themselves to really be happy, or they start to feel negative self-worth if they don't have yet that achievement.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that's one of the things I probably deal with more than most things with the athletes at BYU and just athletes in general, right? Because from a young age, and it makes sense, when you perform well, you get a lot of attention, you get a lot of, you get recruited by coaches. And so there's kind of all of these indirect and sometimes direct messages that, wow, like when I perform well, I get a lot of attention and a lot of good things happen in my life. And sometimes we get carried away because we forget that, it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to go the way you want it to go. And so if we don't have something else to base our worth and our value off outside of the performance or what we accomplish, then that's a slippery slope. And so I think finding subtle ways to help kids, remind them that, regardless of how you perform today, like, of course you want to perform well, and I know it's important to you, but regardless of how you perform today, I love you as a daughter. You're still a sister. You're a child of God. Finding other ways, other aspects in their life to help them remember that I'm more than just a gymnast or a cross country athlete or a football player. We're not trying to take away from the fact that it's important to them and that it is a part of their identity. We're just trying to expand that identity of what helps bring them purpose. And I actually go back to the confidence curve thing.
Oh, yeah.
Quite frequently. I think it was Amber
Selking.
Yeah. I want to give proper credit where credit is due. I actually did this with 3 athletes today. Same thing, where it's like, if we base confidence and self-worth off of performance, it's a roller coaster. It's great when it's great and it's really bad when it's bad. But we have to find kind of those other things outside of sport to kind of help mitigate some of those peaks and valleys, so it's not such a intense ride.
Yeah. So the idea, I love that. That's actually a perfect illustration of this. So like the idea for people who are listening who don't know this concept, it's, if you picture a sine curve, that goes ups and downs, peaks and valleys, that's kind of life, right?
Yeah.
Like we have highs, we have lows. If you put it in this perspective or the context of an athlete, you've got a great game, you have a bad game, you miss a catch, you fumble the ball, whatever. And if you've got so much of your self-worth and identity concentrated in that thing, then your emotional state will follow those peaks and valleys. Whereas if you diversify kind of your sources of self-worth and where you've got deriving your confidence from and identity, then you can kind of mute those peaks and valleys, as you said. I do love that concept. That's a great concept.
I mean, it's not that it's not going to affect you, but the magnitude of the effect is going to be a little less, and it helps you keep things in proper perspective.
Yeah.
Because now, instead of just being so focused on one specific part of my life, that it's an important part of my life, I'm actually recognizing that I still have these other aspects of my life that make me who I am and make me whole.
Yeah. I love that. That's something I think a lot about with my kids. And I don't know that I do it very well yet, but I want them to be all in, and I want them to be very goal oriented and achievement oriented, and not place all their self-worth on achieving the big goals that I hope they set for themselves.
For sure.
Let's see. Maybe say this, just because I know we are doing this project where we've observed in some of our work in our clinics and at the Addiction Recovery Center how much healthy habits affect somebody's confidence and resilience, ability to be emotionally resilient. But have you noticed any of that with your athletes, patterns in whether it's nutrition or sleep or whatever, some of these physical lifestyle habits, and how that affects a person's confidence and emotional resilience?
For sure. I mean, it probably has sleep for sure, and nutritional intake has I think a lot greater impact on emotional and mental functioning that a lot of athletes realize. It's one of those things where it's like, it seems so simple and obvious to me because I've been studying about it and learning about it and talking about it for years and years. But then I have to realize some of these kids are, 18. It's the first time they're away from home. And so they don't have the same breadth of knowledge or understanding. But I usually start first session with all athletes getting kind of an accounting of their sleep habits, their eating habits, kind of what they do outside of their sport, just to kind of see the full picture of what I'm working with. And it's really fascinating how many athletes consistently struggle on the sleep side and the nutrition side. And then when we kind of help them understand like how connected the gut and the brain are, and the restorative power of sleep, and if we're not getting consistent quality sleep, like that's 100% going to affect your ability to focus at practice and your emotion regulation, and it's all connected.
See, I love the power of those levers that we can pull, I feel like it's underutilized, I think, in a lot of clinical practice. You know what I mean? And then not that we'd ignore them as a society, but I don't know if we pull on them frequently or deliberately enough before we jump to some of the like medicinal stuff that we do, because those are such powerful levers in helping people with their emotions.
And that's something that I was trained on during my master's program. I'm grateful for the training that I got there, because we took a biopsychosocial spiritual.
Yeah, you introduced me to the spiritual component of the biopsychosocial model. Yeah. You added that.
And that's kind of the approach that we took to understanding human functioning, because when you look at depression from the DSM-5 standpoint, a lot of the symptoms of depression are very consistent with hormonal imbalances or other areas of malnutrition from a nutritional standpoint or blood work standpoint. And so that's one of the first things we're actually trained to do is, when was the last time you went to a doctor and had blood work done? And so we rule out medical related issues first before we dive more into, okay, maybe this is more of a psychological component. If from the biomedical standpoint, things are operating in good order, then maybe it is more of kind of the psychological etiology of, some of these symptoms.
Right. Yeah, I hope one of the themes people take away from listening to these conversations that we have is that, like, let's at least explore those. If we're dealing with an entrenched problem with a mood or energy or focus or whatever else, let's at least explore those lifestyle levers as like a first line of defense that are just getting our bodies to function the way they are supposed to function before we maybe go to more invasive
for sure
interventions.
Yeah. And one of the challenges too is that's kind of the world we live in. And I worked at a family medicine residency for a number of years. And that was one of the frustrations from some of the residents I worked with is it just kind of feels like a fast food drive up where it's like, I'm depressed, give me my medication. And it's like, all right, here's your script sort of thing. Because I'm supposed to be in here for 10 minutes anyway. So, okay, sure. If this makes life easier, then it is what it is. And I'm not saying that they're not practicing bad medicine, but that's just kind of the system that we've developed.
It's the system that's the reimbursement model. It's how it's all set up. That's a topic for another day to try to address those systemic changes that are necessary to actually practice healthcare the way that it should be practiced.
And people are always looking for the quick fix, and they think I just take this pill and it'll help me feel better. And, that might be a component of it, but so is physical activity, so is sleep, so is, relationships with other people. Like those are all things that are interconnected that are going to affect each other.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing with the athletes I work with. They'll come to me sometimes and it's like, so what do I need to do to get, more confident or to, be more focused? And it's like, well, it's going to require some effort on your part, because our meeting one-on-one is one component of it, but you actually taking these principles and these skills and applying them to your daily life consistently, that's what's going to end up making the biggest difference.
I love it.
So there's no quick fix.
No quick fix, but those are important levers.
For sure.
So let's go to theme 2. So this has been conversation on theme number 1, which is about cultivating confidence and resilience. I'd love to, and it's a related theme, but this idea of performing under pressure, there's, again, we as adults deal with this too, whether you have to give a talk somewhere or you got a big presentation or whatever the pressure situation may be, but kids deal with it a lot, and they're still learning maybe to have this confidence that you develop over time in life. But performing under pressure, whether an athlete or a big play or a test or whatever, I would love just some tips, like actual practical tools, 1 or 2 of them that you think are unusually or particularly helpful in those situations.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, there has to be an adequate level of preparation to meet the demand of the task at hand, or what we're trying to accomplish, right? So kind of going back to your example of giving a talk in church, if I go up to the pulpit and I'm just reading my talk for the first time, I'm not going to be able to deliver that with the same conviction or confidence. And if I've rehearsed it to myself in the mirror, I've rehearsed it to my family, and I know the material a lot better. So I do think that's an important element, and it sounds obvious, but it's sometimes is an overlooked element, is you actually have to put in the preparation to feel like you have the ability to do what you're asking yourself to do. So that's the first part. And then the second part is kind of connected to that, where it's reminding myself, like I've put in the work. This is what I've done all week in practice. Nothing changes. Now I just go execute what I've practiced. I don't need to make the moment bigger than what it is. I'm just focusing on executing what I've spent hours and hours practicing leading up to that moment. And then kind of the self-talk of it. So this is kind of the third part too, is having some sort of, power statement, cue, self-talk, whatever you want to call it, in that moment that you can redirect your focus to, because our brain is constantly all over the place, thinking about a lot of different things. There's a lot of distractions, both externally and internally. And if we don't have something specific to have our brain focus on, it's easy to get carried away in those distractions. So whether it's a physical thing that you can focus on, or a mantra that's meaningful to you, something that you can fill your headspace with that allows you to be in that moment and perform what you've prepared to do.
I remember one time I asked a question about this when one of my kids was getting ready for something, like what advice, like how should I be coaching him? And you said something to the effect of just tell him he doesn't have to be any more than he is, which is kind of that principle that you were just talking about. It's like, you've put in the work, you've been doing this all week in practice, just go out and do that. Like, you don't have to do anything different than what you've been doing already. Yeah.
So I don't know how it's received by the athletes that I say this to, and maybe we'll have to ask them, but we have a soccer athlete, and we just played the number 4 ranked UCLA team, really good team, and beat them 1-0. And one of the soccer athletes, she was posting about the game. And so I sent her a DM and I said, you know what the beautiful thing about tonight is? And she said, what's that? And I said, you don't have to be anything more or less than what you already are. Just go be you. And I don't know if that makes a difference, but I think that where that stems from is, I remember back to, like, especially when I was getting recruited in high school, and I'd be told, oh, Coach Croton's here from Oregon. And so then in my mind, I'd go to this place of, I have to go ball out and catch every ball and make no mistakes. But then knowing what I know now, I remind athletes, he was there to watch you because you were good enough from what you had done up to that point, which wasn't perfect and involved drop balls and making mistakes. And so I think that if we can remind ourselves, I've done the work, I'm prepared, and I just have to be me and try to embody some of those traits that help me be at my best, whether it's, full effort, being a good teammate, having fun, instead of being so caught up in the outcome, then that puts me in a position to give myself the best chance to succeed in those big moments.
I love that advice. I think it's such good advice. I can imagine that athlete getting that DM and just like breathing a sigh of relief, like, he's right.
Yeah. And that's one of the things you'll see me sometimes walking around the football field pregame with the athletes, and that's put my arm around their shoulder and I'll say, what the beautiful thing about tonight is? You just got to go be you. Nothing more, nothing less. Just go be you. So
much wisdom in that little sentence,
Yeah. It's probably because I needed someone to say that to me 1,000 times, but hopefully it helps some of these other athletes.
I'm having a thought that I don't know if there's any, we didn't talk about this beforehand, and I don't know if there's any good scientific foundation, but I've read some interesting research about how people are more motivated by loss aversion, like avoiding loss, than they are about motivated towards the gain. And that psychology, I wonder if that somehow comes into play in big moments where people, they limit themselves somehow because they would rather prevent like really going all out and making a mistake rather than like the glory of that like success.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any psychology there that is relevant. Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, there is a study, and I don't know the authors, but they did it with soccer players, which is fitting because we're talking about soccer a lot. But they kind of went through that same process where one of the settings they created was, okay, we're playing to win this game. And then the other setting was kind of created in a context where, okay, we need to try not to lose. And it was fascinating, the difference between the two groups. The group that played to win ended up having like a much higher percentage of shots on goal or goals scored. I think it was like a penalty kick situation type of thing, versus the group that was more concerned with not losing. So, and it's also kind of tied back to kind of viewing a challenge as a threat or something to avoid or be afraid of versus as an opportunity to grow and learn. And that's something I the way I describe it to the athletes I work with, it's not this might be, resonant with the younger people listening to this, is it's kind of the cow versus buffalo mentality. So when a storm's coming, there's a cow and a buffalo. The cow sees the storm and it says, man, that looks brutal. I don't want any part of that. So it turns and it starts running the other direction. And what happens is the storm they end up spending more time in the storm trying to avoid it.
Just running with it.
Than the buffalo. They see the same storm, and they say, man, that's going to be intense, but I'm going straight into that thing, because they know that even though it's going to be intense for a moment, the faster they go into it and lean into that discomfort, the more quickly they'll get out on the other side.
I love that visual. That's such a good visual of this idea of leaning into hard things, or
because
leaning into adversity.
The hard thing doesn't change. And that's the important part, is it's our perception of that event, or our mentality going into that thing is what we have control over. And that can make a huge difference.
And I think going back to this idea of like loss aversion, I wonder, and I hadn't thought of this prior to, as I was listening to some of the things you're saying here today, but I almost wonder if the wisdom to be had in that psychology that, obviously the people that perform better were the ones who were focused on winning rather than not losing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are psychologically biased towards loss aversion,
mm-hmm.
there's maybe some just awareness there, that could provide some wise counsel for us as parents as we think about our kids, to help acknowledge and identify that, hey, in certain moments, you're going to feel inclined to maybe retreat, because putting yourself out there in this way, you might feel like if you fail, you're going to be exposed. We'll go to another topic that we're going to hit on failure, but maybe that idea of loss aversion is like, if they can see that we're biased towards that mode of behavior, and help them then intentionally envision and plan for combating that and reacting differently, they can have those better outcomes, like in that soccer study you mentioned.
For sure.
So
there's a lot of things you can do with visualization around that, because a lot of times people think, and I'm actually going through the script that I use with the football team, because I do a pregame visualization meditation the night before every game, home and away. And
I want a library of all these. I want to capture all of these and like put them in an audio library for the world.
Yeah. I mean, I can shoot them your way at some point in time, but, and obviously, yes, you want to visualize yourself having a successful outcome and things going well. But what we know about the world of sports is that never does that happen that way. There's always going to be some sort of adversity, some hurdle to overcome. And so what's equally important in that visualization, kind of what you're talking about, is noticing that I'm probably am going to have feelings of nervousness or doubt, and that's totally normal. Instead of freaking out, is seeing, okay, how am I going to respond, and what's my plan going to be when, not if, those emotions and thoughts show up, so that I'm not waiting for the moment itself to now try to make that decision when I'm kind of in this fight or flight state of mind. I've already made the commitment and the decision beforehand. So I knew I was going to feel this way. And this was my commitment to how I was going to handle it when it happened. And I was going to talk myself through. I was going to remind myself all the preparation I've done. I was going to have some sort of mantra or something I can focus on that can help me kind of ride the wave of that emotion.
So helpful and so powerful, some of these tools. Okay. So to recap this section, maybe let's do it in an interesting way. You've given us some principles and ideas in here, talking about performing under pressure, and even the confidence and resilience conversation we were having. But maybe to put a bow on this theme of performing under pressure, give us a model for us, the pep talk you'd give a young person who, like, as if you're speaking directly to them, they're going into a big moment, and recap maybe some of the principles you just talked about with us in the form of a pep talk role model for the kids.
Yeah. So
role play.
You might be disappointed, because a lot of people think that that's kind of what I do with my job, but I feel like I ask a lot more questions than actually giving advice. So typically what I would do, and this is what I do with a lot of the athletes, is I say, okay, it's about that time, game day. How are we feeling? And what's the focus for the night? And it's usually, I try to help them narrow it down to 1 to 3 things, because if we have too many things we're trying to focus on, that overcomplicates things. And that kind of has the opposite effect. But if we don't have anything to focus on, then we run the risk of getting carried away with whatever feeling, emotion, thought that might be present in that moment. So it's the power of giving ourselves something intentional in the moment that we have control over to focus on, that we feel confident that we can execute. And so kind of a quick check-in. How are we feeling? Usually it's like, I'm hyped, I'm ready to go, or I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And then the next part of it is, okay, what's the focus? And usually it's, I want to focus on, great communication, full effort, and having, a good first 2 touches or something. Or
a couple very simple things they can anchor their thoughts to.
Yep. Because now I'm not worried anything about the outcome, which can create a sense of stress and pressure and expectations.
Out of control. It's out of your control.
Yep. I'm really helping modeling. Let's focus on a couple of things within your control that you feel like you can do regardless of the circumstance.
I love it.
And then can't wait to see it,
And letting them come up with the answer rather than feeling as a parent like, hey, I've got to say the right thing to motivate my child in this moment. I love that you reframed it and said, it's actually questions. So they are saying it and they're thinking about it rather than you saying it and they're kind of not really listening to your pep talk.
And not to nerd out too much on some of the research behind it, but if you look at self-determination theory, Deci and Ryan, it's like the 3 core aspects of motivation is autonomy. So feeling I have a choice in what I'm doing. And that kind of hits on the autonomy part. When I get to decide what I want to focus on and what I want to do, that actually helps me feel a lot more motivated to do that thing than someone telling me to do it for me, if that makes sense. And then also that sense of relatedness where it's like, regardless of how you perform or don't perform, I still love you. Now, they might not believe that in the moment. That might not be what they want to hear, but I think reinforcing that. And then also like how we frame questions after a game, that can help either be in alignment with what we're saying, or it can, not align with that. And then it kind of sends this mixed messages.
Yeah. It shows that there's some inauthenticity there.
For sure.
Give us an example of that, like an post-game question.
Yeah. So one of those things typically is, so how many goals did you score, or did you guys win? And so right off the bat, we're kind of sending the message that winning is important and how many goals I scored is important, versus, hey, so what did you think about the game? What were some of what was the hardest part about the game? What was something that you were really proud of, or what was the best part about the game for you? And so then it completely de-emphasizes the outcome, and it just kind of lets them take it where they want to take it. And then even if you want to make it next level, is actually asking them beforehand, so what is it that I can do as a parent that is helpful for you? Like, what is it that's helpful and what is it that's not helpful? And you got to have a lot of humility and be ready, because kids can be brutally honest sometimes. And especially depending on the relationship there. And you might have to get some hard feedback from a kid, but I think that can also give us a lot of information about what they best need in that moment and how we can be most helpful and what's actually not helpful. Even if we think as a parent we are being helpful, sometimes our kid is like, stop doing that. But if we don't know that, then we keep doing these things, and then it creates this kind of
a distance, a wall.
Frustration feedback loop. And it's,
Well, I love that counsel, because it almost takes the pressure off of us, as me as a parent, to feel like I don't have to have the perfect thing to say. I need to ask them a couple good questions and let them process and help them be prepared, beforehand, hopefully, to know how to think through some of the questions. But it takes that pressure off the parent, because now I just have to ask questions and get them reflecting and thinking about tools that they hopefully will have developed.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is having the awareness like of self, like how am I doing emotionally right now after this game? And then how is my kid doing emotionally after this game? Because sometimes in the heat of the moment, we want to talk about something right now, but I'm running, red hot emotionally, and my kid's running red hot emotionally. And that's just a recipe for disaster. Versus, okay, I'm not in a good place to have a productive conversation, so I'm going to model allowing myself to kind of get back down to more physiological baseline functioning before we have, a potentially difficult conversation.
Yeah, so timing matters based on your emotional state.
For sure.
And their emotional state.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go. This is so good. Let's go to theme 3 and talk about failure and insecurities. So maybe just talk to us about the idea of failure and how we should be thinking about it and how we should help our kids start to think about the, because all of us do fail.
Yeah.
And if you're not failing, maybe you're not putting yourself out there enough, like we talked about earlier, which is important for self-confidence and resilience.
For sure.
So talk to us about failure and how we should be framing that in our minds and helping our kids start to think about that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but I love the acronym of FAIL. It just stands for first attempt in learning. Unfortunately, we've kind of, as a society, and just like through, implicit and explicit messages in the media and, hearing interviews and just how we talk about it in our families, create failure out to be this bad thing or something to avoid. And so I think one of the examples I use, and this is just, people will think what they want, but so Hadley, she started violin lessons a couple of years ago. And before her first lesson, my words of advice to Hadley was, you're going to be really bad. So have fun, like just go into it knowing that you're probably going to be really bad, because why wouldn't you be bad? You've never done this before. But I think that sometimes we go into things and we kind of make this assumption that just because I'm not good at something means I can't do it or I shouldn't keep doing it. Versus if we look at it from a realistic perspective, which is, this is the first time I'm learning something. So of course it's going to be hard. Of course it's going to be frustrating. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a natural part of the learning and growth process. So I think if we can help kids reevaluate their relationship with what failing actually means and kind of frame it as it's actually a really good thing and it's an important part of any skill development process, that's a useful thing to do as a parent.
And so how do you do that? I mean, I guess it's just conversation and teaching and helping them with like repeating that principle somehow as you're talking with your kids, so they start to develop that mindset.
Yeah. And I think there's also creative ways of doing it too. And this is why I love where professional athletes have kind of entered the scene and they talk about their experience with failure, because then it doesn't always have to come from us as parents. Now we're learning about it from,
Michael Jordan,
the best of the best. And they talk about, man, I failed so much and I had the worst practice ever. And, I had nights where I went 1 for 13. And then it's like, wow, like Steph Curry has nights where he goes 0 for 11. Like he's the best shooter to ever play the game of basketball. But then it kind of helps reinforce that message that it's not always going to be the perfect highlight reel game. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's part of how it works, sort of thing.
And leveraging those role models who they maybe aspire to be like,
for
and
sure,
say, here's the data. And that those can be maybe some good aha moments. That's a good tip.
Which next to past accomplishments in terms of developing confidence. So that's the number one driver of confidence is past accomplishments, which makes sense. Is like, if I've done this in the past, then I have evidence to believe that I can do it again. The second most, I think, important factor, at least from the research standpoint, is vicarious learning. So if I see that you're able to, build that desk in your house, then that gives me confidence that, well, if you can do it, then I might be able to do it. And that's kind of the same concept with, well, if Novak Djokovic can learn how to navigate losing all these matches and being frustrated and figure out a way to come back and be the greatest ever, then, maybe I can figure it out too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about when I was a kid and how much, whether it was Bo Jackson and that picture of Bo where, remember the old baseball card or picture of Bo where he had the football pads on and the baseball bat? You remember that? I mean, I think about if I in a situation had somebody point to me and use that example, it'd be all ears, because I just, for whatever reason, we idolize some of these iconic figures. And it could be that it could transcend sports too, right? It could be that, hey, you're an aspiring like performing artist and you love, Hugh Jackman, you think, because he's so amazing vocally and with acting, whatever, like pointing to the roles that he didn't get or whatever, that could be a really powerful tool.
Yeah. I mean, I try to have a few of those just on hand. And I was actually, so I went out to Colorado to talk to my niece's competitive 10U softball team. And that's one of the things, and I tried to make it more like baseball specific, softball specific to, speak their language. But that's one of and a couple of them, they didn't really know because it was Babe Ruth and Cy Young, but it was kind of the same concept. Cy Young has, the best pitcher in baseball award named after him. He holds the record for most wins in Major League Baseball history. And he also holds the record for most losses in Major League Baseball history. And then Babe Ruth had the home run record for like 15 years before someone broke it. but he also led Major League Baseball 7 seasons in strikeouts. And so again, it's highlighting that failure is just a natural, expected part of any time you're trying to strive for getting good at anything or developing any skill. There's going to be elements of failure. And so we have to learn can I embrace it as something that's a normal part of this versus as a personal attack against my abilities and what I can and what I can't do, which is what a lot of people tend to do.
That baseball example, I love that. It goes back to something we talked about earlier too, which is, man, we got to help our kids. I feel like we need to do a better job societally at inviting our young people to stretch.
Yeah.
Like inviting them to do hard things, to rise up. In that baseball scenario, to swing for the fences.
Yeah.
And that might mean if you want to be Babe Ruth, you're going to strike out a lot. But if you're just going to go up and bunt every time you're up to the plate, you're never going to strike out, but you're never going to be Babe Ruth.
Yeah. You're never going to hit a home run either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so getting people comfortable, the willingness to take risks, which I think goes along with that building confidence and resilience, is the companion principle to this idea of you've got to embrace and reframe failure and be comfortable with it as part of learning and growth and achievement.
For sure. And that's a hard concept because I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's like we all have this inherent negativity bias where we kind of are more naturally drawn towards, negative, hard, disappointing things. And so we're kind of working against our own biological wiring to begin with. But I think that's kind of the point too is, and I use this example too. It's like when you're driving on the street and you see a stop sign, and sometimes I have to be careful because, depending on the kid, they might out their parent like, oh, my parent doesn't stop. He just runs right through it. And that's a whole different conversation. But the point is we learned over the course of our years of life that red sign with that word on it means stop your car. There's no one forcing me to stop my car, but just naturally, instinctively, I stop my car. And so if I can learn that a red sign with the word stop on it means I'm supposed to stop, then maybe I can learn failure can mean something that's helpful or productive or something different than what, it's been made out to be from a lot of people.
Is there anything that comes to mind, or whether it's people who are really good at this that you've known or worked with, or principles that you think are important to keep in mind about bouncing back from failure? So are there people that you've observed that are really good at bouncing back from failure, and what is it that they do? Or you could just answer, are there some principles about kind of bouncing back from failure, ideas that are helpful?
Yeah. One of my favorite concepts, and I should have prefaced this whole conversation by saying that everything that I'm talking about, first off, I know is way easier said than done. So I know that full force. And second off is almost the exact opposite of how I did things as an athlete. So I don't really get to that part of my story, but that's ultimately why I went into this space, is because the mental side of sport was by far the thing that got in my way the most. And so I wanted to be able to learn actual tools and,
help people have those tools that you wish you had,
knowledge, so that I can actually teach people how to do it a lot better than how I did it. So I need to add those disclaimers before we move on anymore. But it was a baseball coach several years ago, and he made a really poor decision in hindsight, looking back, it was a really poor decision that was made. But he was talking about in the moment, he made what he felt was the best decision with everything going on in that situation. And then he realized ultimately there was a poor decision. And so he talked about how he learned from a mentor that you learn the lesson, you leave the event. And so I found with the athletes that I work with is disappointment and frustration is expected when we fail, because these things, it's important to us. It matters to us. We want to do well. And when we don't do well, like, it's frustrating. It's disappointing.
And maybe if you're not disappointed, you might not care enough.
For sure. I would actually be more shocked if you weren't disappointed. And that might be more concerning to me than if you are disappointed.
Right.
And so I tell my athletes, like, you will never hear me say, don't be frustrated, don't be disappointed, because it just means you care. But then it's, okay, so what can I learn from this experience to help me do it differently next time? And that's where I really struggled, was I would just stay so stuck in the self-criticism and beating myself up and the disappointment that I didn't really learn any lessons. It was just, you suck. Like, why are you even playing, sort of thing. but it's, can I sit with that frustration? And then can I, just from an objective standpoint, okay, what can I actually learn from this so that I can apply it next time moving forward? And I think that's where people really learn how to take that next step from effectively responding to adversity, failure, etc.
Yep. I love that. That's great advice. Okay. So we're going to hit theme number 4. We've hit so far cultivating confidence and resilience. We've hit performing under pressure and navigating failure and insecurities. Let's jump to finding your why. You hear people say that phrase, finding a why and living mindfully. Maybe talk about that or a deeper sense of purpose and why that matters for long-term success.
Yeah. So that's when I talk about a few different P's when it comes to confidence, and we've hit on a couple of them. So past performance, peer learning, positive or productive self-talk. And then usually the last one I talk about is purpose. And in my mind, purpose is twofold. And the first part of purpose is reconnecting to why I do what I do. And this is actually, I usually start my conversations with my athletes about, why do you even do this? Why do you go through the grind of, all the physical conditioning and the mental and emotional stress of every single day to do this? And then that really helps them reconnect to, it's because, I want to play in the NFL, or because, I want to do it for my family, or whatever it is. It's that, I don't really care what their why is. I just think it's important that they have a why. And the importance of that is because in those moments of challenge and suffering and disappointment, it gives meaning to that suffering when we have a strong enough purpose for why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we don't have a strong enough purpose in those moments, it's really easy just to say, like, why, what's the point? Like, why would I continue to do this if it's not really connected to something that's fulfilling and meaningful to me? So I think that's the first part of having a purpose. And the second part is remembering that, and we kind of talked about this a little bit already, is my performance on the field or on the court is just a fraction of what makes me me, and that I have much more to offer, the world and my team and my family than what I do or what I don't do on the field. And so I think that those are kind of the two main components of having a strong purpose and a why. Is
give us an example of, what would somebody say? Like, you're talking to, whether it's a gymnast or a football player or dive, somebody on the swim and dive team, you're having this conversation about purpose. Like, just for illustrative purposes, what are some of the things that people might say, or you might help them discover as a purpose in, ultimately that context of trying to be a high performing athlete?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes back to like this, it's kind of a self-fulfillment. Like, I just want to see how far I can push myself and what I'm capable of achieving. So kind of like that sense of like becoming my best self, maximizing my talents and abilities. Family is a big component. I want to do it for my family. A lot of people have sacrificed a lot to get me here. And so I feel like I kind of owe it to them to, see how far I can push myself. A lot of people, it's for, there's money purposes. I want to be able to provide for my family and, help out my mom or my grandma or, my future children and spouse, sort of thing. So there's a lot of different motivating factors. But I think the point is having that visible, because it's easy when things are really difficult to lose sight of, why am I doing this to begin with? And so I think it's not a Viktor Frankl quote, but it's a Nietzsche quote. He who has a strong enough why can bear almost anyhow.
Right.
And I reference that quote frequently with the athletes that I work with, because we're not diminishing the fact that it's not going to be challenging and difficult. We're just keeping the challenge and the difficulty of what we're doing in the context of, it's for a greater purpose or something that's meaningful to me.
That concept it's not that hard to see and understand how that can be a huge factor in performance and long-term success and confidence. And you hear stories all the time of the athlete who had some kind of story, whether it's a grandfather passed. I'm thinking of like Chris Paul. Do you ever hear that Chris Paul story?
Yeah.
His grandpa passed and he had this game where he just went lights out and scored the number of his, I think it was the number of his grandpa's age or something. It was like 60 something points in a game. I can't remember what it was, but you hear those stories and you can see how when people have a strong purpose, something that family or whatever, it drives them to show up in unique ways.
Yeah. When I can
is,
connect to something beyond myself, my
yeah,
own personal feelings, thoughts, emotions, and connect it to something deeper and more meaningful.
yeah,
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
I love that. So how do we approach that then as parents? How do you start to have that conversation with a child about um, purpose, values, whatever it is, that deeper thing that is going to help motivate them and to have this more transcendent confidence and ability to perform under
Yeah,
pressure?
that's a great question. I think just getting curious about, so what is it you like about your sport or your, performing art or whatever, like, how does it make you feel when you're doing it? And, what are some of the challenges that come along with it? What are some of the things you don't necessarily like? And then usually within those answers, they'll kind of give you some hints and clues as to what really is meaningful about it. Like, I feel so free, and I feel so accomplished, or I feel so happy. And, it's just like a rewarding feeling sort of thing. And so now you can connect it to, okay, this is why it's important to that person specifically. And it's different for everyone, right? But there are some commonalities, at least what I found with athletes that I work with, as far as why they do it. But I think just getting curious, what is it about it that is so fulfilling fulfilling to you, or for fun for you, or why do you do it to begin with?
Well, I mean, that's a theme I'm picking up on in this conversation that I'm going to take away, which is sometimes I worry so much about saying the right thing that I fail to think about asking the right question.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of goodness that can happen just by asking and listening.
Yeah. So I'll share this. And to protect confidentiality, I'll try not to give too much identifying information, but I was meeting with an athlete before I drove over here. And it was, this athlete's been working through a couple of season-ending injuries, and they're finally back in a place where they're going to be able to participate. And so they're kind of navigating some of the emotional highs and lows, and some of the doubt and, lack of confidence, because I haven't done this for 2 years. And so I kind of asked her that question, because she was kind of explaining like the highs and the lows. And I'm like, so how are you able to navigate through those, the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows? Because you got to some pretty, dark places and hard spots. So what was it for you that kind of helped you navigate that? And then they kind of went through, and then one of the things that a quote that they said is, I can navigate difficult moments. And so I kind of captured that as resilience. And then I wrote in quotes, I can navigate difficult moments. And I said, I cannot tell you how much I love that you phrased it exactly that way, because there's so many important takeaways, which is the difficulty. It's, even though sometimes it feels like it in the moment, it doesn't last forever. Like there's going to be, the only thing that's constant in life is change, right? Like something that might feel really difficult and really hard right now, 3 months from now is not going to be the same as it is right now. And so I love coming from her that she was able to say, I have the ability to know that whatever's thrown my way, I can navigate through that difficult moment. And it was because of the great amount of suffering and the frustration and the difficulty of the thing that she had been to up to that point, which is what allowed her to have that perspective and that sense of resilience, which kind of recaps a lot of what we were just talking about.
Yeah. Such a good, I mean, I love the stories though. The stories make it come alive. You can start to see these principles and how they can help somebody if they're really adopting them or embracing them. Okay. So maybe last, let's go to this. Are there any other stories that you think are worth sharing where you've seen a student athlete that has been struggling? They've picked up a certain habit or routine or specific skill that you've tried to give them that has really made a difference in how they're able to be resilient emotionally, or to show up under pressure, or to navigate disappointment? Anything that comes to mind, but just I'd love another maybe practical example of just somebody who's picked up a skill or an idea and put it into practice.
Yeah. So I'll share this story. I like to share this one. So we had a guy on the football team, and he would puke his guts out before every game. And not only would he throw up, but he would like throw up in the trash can that was in the middle of the locker room in front of the whole team. And so the first time he did it, our nutritionist and our director of sports science, they came up to me, because I'm the mental health guy. And they're like, hey, you might want to go check on this guy to make sure he's doing okay. And so that was one of those moments where I had to pause myself and kind of ask, okay, what is the most effective way to handle this situation. And sometimes it's kind of like nerve wracking because it's like in the heat of the moment, like I got to be the one to,
and you're supposed to have the answers.
like I'm the one who's supposed to be able to navigate this effectively.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I went up to this player and I put my hands on his shoulder pads and I looked him in the eye and I said, "Hey, now you're ready to go." And he kind of looked at me like, all perplexed. And he was like, because I think that he was expecting me as the mental health guy to put my arm around him and say, "Hey, are you doing okay? Are you nervous? Are you feeling okay?" Which kind of would have reinforced that like how he was feeling in that moment was a bad thing.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to some of the stuff we talked about it's how we frame it, right? It was just his body's own unique way to prepare to do something really exciting. And if I would have put the idea in his mind that it's something to be afraid of or nervous about, then now moving forward, he's going to have that same reaction every time he throws up. And it's going to cause like this snowball effect of, well, now I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm going to play well. And then every game after that, I put my hands on his shoulder and he would look at me and he'd say, "Now I'm ready." And it made me laugh every time. And I loved it.
But he got the mindset. It was like a mindset shift.
Yeah. Just how we interpret what's happening to us can be helpful, or it can actually make things more challenging for us in that moment.
I love it.
Another thing, just working with another football player this fall camp. And one of the things that we talked about is just the power of doing things intentionally. Right. And we've talked a little bit about why that's important, because if we don't give our brain something intentional to focus on, it's easy to get distracted, whatever else. And so he'd go into each practice with just 2 or 3 things that he really wanted to focus on. Some of them were mental, some of them were physical. And then I think 2 weeks into camp, he came up to me and he goes, I've noticed the biggest difference in just how I approach practice, what I'm getting out of practice. And I feel like it is helping me so much. And to me, it's another one of those things where it's like, is this stuff that we talk about, like, does it actually even work? Does it help, And then when you have people that actually do the work and apply it and they receive the benefit from it, then it's a great reminder that it's not complex, like extraordinary things that people do. It's mastering just the small, simple things and being consistent with those over time is what yields really great results. So I think that those are just a few examples.
I love it. Those are really great. So we've talked about a number of things. We've hit cultivating confidence and resilience, performing under pressure, navigating failure and insecurities, and then this idea of finding purpose or why and living mindfully. And then shared a couple stories. I'd love, as we just wrap up, if there's what we like to end all of our episodes with, we call it ideas in action. Yeah. Which is, now one parting piece of advice, this practical takeaway. Somebody's listening to this and they're like, "Man, there's so much good stuff. I want to meet with Braden all the time," which is what people usually say when they get to know you and listen to you. But what's one parting piece of advice to kind of put a bow on the conversation?
That's a great question. I would say for parents is you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay because you're not supposed to be perfect, but work with your kids to figure out for them what's most helpful and what's not helpful, and have the courage and the humility to be receptive to that feedback can be really helpful. And then for kids, and this applies to all of us too. And this actually came from one of the soccer athletes that I worked with. She was saying, I was meeting with one of my teammates and we came to the conclusion that like 99% of college sports is just learning how to effectively navigate failure. And I said, "You are so right. Like, that is 100% truth." So learn how to view failure as not a bad thing or something to avoid, but something that's just a natural part of doing anything worthwhile. You're going to fail along the way. It's expected. It's supposed to happen. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to do it. It just means you're learning, you're figuring it out, what works, what doesn't work. And the only time that you really can't succeed or do something is when you just stop trying. So wisdom
from a lot of experience helping real people make real changes and figure this stuff out in their life. But so grateful, Braden, for you, for how authentically you try to help people and the example you are in your family, the example you are as a friend to people who are dealing with hard things. And if you want more, I love following you on Instagram. I've kind of gotten on Instagram more recently, but I love following you because you're putting out good stuff. So I'd encourage you to follow Braden on Instagram. What's your handle? Dr. B PhD.
Dr.B.PhD. Yeah. Try to make it short and memorable.
We'll put it in the notes, but I encourage you to follow Braden just because there's great stuff that he posts that's worth sharing with your kids and lots of wisdom. So follow Braden. You'll be glad you did. We're grateful that you're here. And thanks for joining us for another conversation, Core Conversations episode today. We hope you join us again.
Don't feel like watching from the sidelines. Yeah, I'm waking with the sunrise. Get a taste of the daylight. This time I'ma live it up. Sing it out at the top of my lungs.